Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Dumelang. President Clinton and Ms. Chelsea Clinton, Professor Njabule Ndebele, board members and patrons of both the Clinton Foundation and the Mandela Center for Memory, fellow councillors, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, young and future leaders of our country, welcome to South Africa's capital city, the city of Tshwane, the city of excellence. We are meeting here today to exchange views and ideas at the Pretoria Showgrounds, which don't look very nice from the outside. However, it is known for hosting events of national significance and, importantly, the national nerve center of our elections. Sometime next year, very soon, you will be watching this space again for a completely different reason. This is where every 5 years the country looks upon for a new government to be announced. I am therefore confident that the ideas which we will share today will equal the glory of this venue and set us on a renewed course for change making and thus affirming us as real change makers. Well, mine is a very simple task of making all of you welcome and comfortable so that your thoughts and expressions can resonate and unleash the energy for idealizing and the creativity for recalling of our daily lives as change makers. And as I welcome you, I am honored to be speaking to you briefly as our young people and our future torchbearers. So please allow me to quote our beloved icon and former president, Tata Nelson Mandela, when he said, open quote, "There is no passion to be found playing small. In settling for life that is less than the one you are capable of living," close quote. The relevance of these words to what you young people will be engaging in this evening is that indeed you have chosen to play a role that you must believe in, and you are doing so in a very big way, and are passionate about getting more and more young people to engage in meaningful dialogue that has great potential in changing the world for the better. Today's dialogue is a statement of the influence and inspiration of former President Nelson Mandela's leadership has left on and continues to imprint a sense of community service and voluntarism to the community. As you engage in this conversation, I want to urge you to continue to be inspired by Tata Madiba's philosophies, his belief in possibility of tomorrow, and how he continues to inspire people, communities, and all of us to take concrete action to help change the world for the better. As individuals and leaders in your own circles and constituencies, I want to urge you to continue to take action, and through constructive engagement, dialogue, and through your selfless services to our elderly and your peers, to support our quest to ensure that Africa reach its full potential. With those few words, I want to welcome you to our warm and beautiful city and to encourage you to keep encouraging your own peers to take the lead in changing the world. Welcome to the city of Tshwane.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Minister of the Presidency, Trevor Manuel.
Good evening to all of you. You've been welcomed. The big show is coming. This is not my show. I just want to thank you for being here, and I want to pay a special word of welcome to President Clinton and Chelsea for being here. It's fundamentally important. Hello, Zama. It's fundamentally important that you are here to engage with them. It's not about listening to them, it's about engaging with them and this fantastic panel that they've put together. We don't afford ourselves sufficient opportunity to engage in this way. That President Clinton and Chelsea have come here to help us along is a great opportunity. My request to you is don't waste it. It doesn't come that often. Use it renew yourselves, renew your commitment, and feel better about yourselves and about the country at the end of the evening. That's what they're here to do. They're helping us along. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our change makers.
Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tuneza. I am an external relations coordinator at Ubuntu Education Fund. I first met Ubuntu in 2001 in my primary school when I was enrolled for computers and other opportunities that they provided in the school. So in 2004, my father passed away and my mother passed away exactly a year later. So I was left to take care of my little brother and sister. So we had to move to stay in a cardboard shack with our aunt and her 3 kids and a cousin. So because I was enrolled to be an Ubuntu client, that didn't make me to stop wishing for the future, and it didn't bounded me not to look forward in terms of the future. So Ubuntu provided so many opportunities for me as a result. I'm so nervous. So Ubuntu provided me so many opportunities that I never even dreamed of when when both of my parents were alive. So in 2007, I was invited to speak on the Clinton Global Initiative. So in 2008, I graduated in high school, meaning finishing my matric. In 2009, I did my first year in financial management. So today, I am so thrilled to share with you that I graduated and I finished the degree in a year's time. So today, I am so proud to be a graduate in one of the best universities in the country and being part of community development program by working as an external relations department in one of the best non-profit organizations in the world, Ubuntu. So being an external relations coordinator exposed me to so many opportunities, because last year I traveled to Germany to attend a farewell of the most respected man in the VW group, Mr. Jürgen Stumpf, and I had the privilege of knowing the company from its roots. And later, even last year in 2012, I traveled to Dubai to share the wonders of my Ubuntu in the cocktail party that was organized by our board member, Philip. So the experience was great and the place was wow. So now I am working as an external relations coordinator at Ubuntu, and after I have obtained 3 years working experience there, I am looking forward to pursue my MBA, and I am so looking forward to start with it.
Viva, viva zetu. Viva zetu, viva. Hi everyone, my name is Shaga Sisulu. I am one of a small group of friends that a couple of years ago started trying to make a change in people's lives and would go out into our communities and find work that needed to be done and help out, just really lend a helping hand. And the important thing about what we were trying to do is we felt, it was fun. And because of that, I think it became attractive to other people, and other people joined because I think most of us want to find a way to do something good, to do something great, and to connect with our respective communities. And a few years later, when the first Mandela Day came about, we figured we'd try and put something together for people. And since then, we've taken on average every year between 2,000 to 6,000 people to go and do different things, different activities, in terms of giving back or touching a community. And people always look at the output of, hey, there's all these guys, these 13,000 members who are going out and doing something. And that's not, I think for me, that's not really the big deal. The big deal is the impact it has of people who come and participate. Because it's a reminder of how much distance there is between most of us and our general communities, and yet of how much responsibility there rests on all of us that actually do have something to give. Those of us who are fortunate enough to be here, fortunate enough to have a job, fortunate enough to have a roof over our heads, and importantly have an idea of what we're going to be doing the next day. And so we called the initiative Cheese Kids because initially the idea was, let's get all these cheese kids, these people that have grown up with privilege, to actually start giving back. And now we're glad to say it's not just about cheese kids, it's about everybody who recognizes that doing good can make you great. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kave Bulambo, and I'm the director and founder of Women Across Borders. 11 years ago, I landed in South Africa, Durban, with my family coming all the way from the DRC. In 2003, I went back to high school and completed that with extension and went on to pursue a degree in psychology funded by the Albert Einstein Foundation. In 2008, I started Women Across Borders to give back to the refugee community of which I came from, and to date, I've been running the organization with help of other volunteers as well. The reason for founding Women Across Borders is basically to give back to the refugee community and also see potential of what refugee women and girls can become if given the chance to. So I'm really glad to be here tonight, and I hope that I'll get to engage with you at a greater extent. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege to be here. My name is Strive Masiwa. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been in business since 1986, when I had a bit more hair. I've built a telecommunications group called Econet Wireless. We have a presence on 3 or 4 continents. But my main interest is supporting children. My wife and I support about 48,000 orphans with school education in Africa. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name's Sadil Ibrahim. I'm the founding executive director of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, which is a foundation committed to transforming the continent through leadership and governance work. Why I'm particularly excited to be here is as someone who was entrusted with leadership of an organization at a young age. I was 22 when I started the foundation. I think that there's huge potential to use our young people in this continent more intelligently, to engage them and put them in leadership roles from a younger age. We have to remember that the average age of an African is 19, and the average age of an African president is 62. We need to bridge that gap, and I see many people here who can do that. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is James Mwangi, Chief Executive of Equity Bank. Walking this journey of shaping tomorrow. And this journey for me started with my mother. A widowed woman who had never gone to formal school, invested so much in me to change my tomorrow. And that tomorrow, today, when I look back, the insights of the wisdom that he had made me choose to give quite a bit back to change tomorrow for many. I'm credited with developing a banking model tailored for the bottom of the pyramid. We are now the largest bank in Africa in number of customers. 57% of all bank accounts in Kenya, a country with 46 banks, are held by Equity Bank, making banking inclusive for all, and basically then empowering people to reach. And having done that, we realized there was still more we couldn't reach. We focused on building a foundation that started sponsoring the very best gifted in the country to see whether we could nurture the future leadership. Today we have 1,500 of students in university, with 92 in Ivy League schools, with Harvard having 14. And from the lessons of the transformation that is having in the nation, we focused on gifted but needed kids. We have 10,000 students in secondary schools trying to change their tomorrow. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Njabulo Ndebele, Chairman of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Chelsea Clinton, Vice Chair of the Clinton Foundation, and the founder of the Clinton Foundation, and the 42nd President of the United States of America, President Bill Clinton.
Good evening. My name is Njabulo Ndebele. I am the chair of the Nelson Mandela Center of Memory and the Mandela Rhodes Foundation. And most of my life, I've been a writer of fiction and nonfiction, as well as a leader in many universities in South Africa. We welcome you on behalf of our foundation, and to say just how delighted we are to be cooperating with the Clinton Foundation tonight. We work with the future, and I just want to share quickly an African proverb with you, which I thought relevant for today. It goes something like, if you ever thought you are not sure of making a difference in the world, try sleeping in a closed room with a mosquito. And the point of it is that the mosquito, when it is in that room bothering you, it's doing what it was made to do. In other words, the mosquito is living out its essence. And I think this is what it means to be a young person, to live out your essence. And that you're living out that essence in your youthfulness, in the energy, in your optimism, in your desire to take on the world without fear, often exercising some care along the way. And I think this is why we're here today, to look at the future and live out our essence. We look forward to the evening as we explore the various aspects of this theme. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ndebele. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be very brief. This is supposed to be a dialogue, and we're going to move to questions pretty quickly. I do want to say we're being joined on Facebook and Twitter, and I want to thank all the people who are following us in cyberspace. And I thank our change makers. They're proof positive that change can be made. We are at the end, my daughter and I and our delegation, of a week-long trip to Africa where we're looking at the programs of the Clinton Foundation, the work we do with governments in several countries and with community leaders. And we're doing our version of embracing tomorrow by identifying the things we still need to do to improve our healthcare and agricultural and other efforts so that we can operate faster, better, at lower cost in genuine partnership with other people. I want to thank the Mandela Center of Memory and the Foundation for sponsoring this with us, but it's supposed to be a dialogue. I do believe that we have to listen to, understand, and work with other people in order to make anything lasting happen. So this is the beginning of that. Thank you for being here. And I want to turn it over to my daughter, Chelsea. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. One of my favorite quotes is from a man named Charles Franklin Kettering, who for a very long time was the head of research at General Motors and is one of the people who owns the most patents in American history. And he started a foundation during the Great Depression, well before philanthropy or foundations or NGOs were as expected of people who have been as successful as Strive has been. And when he was asked kind of why he was so committed, particularly to ensuring that children in the United States in the midst of the Depression had the educational opportunities that he had had, he said, well, of course I invest in the future. That's where I'm planning on spending the rest of my life. And so I think all of us in this room today, or those who are joining us online, and I love that my father still calls it cyberspace, have a strong bias towards investing in the future. So we look forward to the dialogue. We're grateful to all of our hosts. We hope that you will ask all of us lots of questions. I know we have a couple of questions already ready to go from the audience. I think, yes. If not, I'll just exercise my prerogative as the moderator. Yes, in the back.
think if writing is a mirror, then it is a mirror to be reflected upon and not simply for you to see the reflection and not think about what you see. And so one of the pleasures or the difficulties of being a creative writer, which we share with actors, is that you enter the lives of other people and you render them as complexly as you possibly can, but at the same time, retain the clarity of those characters for understanding. So it is a reflection on the mirror, if it's a mirror, but it is a reflection that you have to ponder.
Anybody else want to comment on this?
Another question?
Ladies and gentlemen, please use the standing mics that are located to either side of the stage for questions. Please use the standing mics.
Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity. My name is Trevor Chweu, and I have interest in a number of non-profit organizations, and I just want to find out, in your opinion, from a global perspective, what is the greatest obstacle in equalizing education for all?
You want to talk about that from the point of view of the Ubuntu experience?
First of all, I would like to thank you, sir, for the question. But I think for South Africa education, we know the state of the education. But for myself, I was helped by the organization Ubuntu to succeed for education. But I think at some stage, it takes you as a person. Because for myself, I told myself that whilst I was from the disadvantaged background of education, I never went to model school, but my primary school was very disadvantaged. But I told myself that one day, I want to be a graduate, and I want to be a graduate in one of the best universities. So I think for us all to be equal in terms of education, also it takes a person. No, someone can take it. Very nervous.
Anybody else want to say anything? Strive?
Well, thank you. You know, there are 61 million children out of school around the world, of whom 43% are on the African continent. And of that 43%, over 60% are girls. So that is our biggest challenge, to ensure that every child gets an opportunity for education. Thank you.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
I personally feel that as a community member and as an individual, it's up to you to create an opportunity for a person to access education. If you see a young person in your community who does not have an opportunity, if you create just for that one person, you have made a change. You have added a number to those who are having access to education. So it starts with you and someone else, and before you know it, you've created opportunities for more young people.
I think in the South African context, there's a great deal of complexity to the issue of education, because the question always arises, you know, is the education that we are given and we are giving adequate for the challenges of our time, and adequate for the challenges of the next 20 to 30 years? And if not, you know, how do we fix that? I also think in the South African context, there's a big elephant in the room that I think we've begun to accept should live there. And that is that our teachers, predominantly, particularly amongst black society, our teachers have come from a base of an inferior education themselves. And their teachers were also deliberately provided with an inferior education. So what you have is a distilled sense of quality education that's going all the way down to our young people today. You know, so when we look at interventions, it can't really be about saying, let's just manage the curriculum. You know, what is the quality of the understanding of the people that are teaching or delivering this? this curriculum. And maybe we have to do something extremely drastic. Maybe we have to say, you know what, let's import a couple of teachers. We have a number of African countries where their education standards are significantly higher than ours. You know, perhaps we should look at that. But, you know, I might get tackled by the unions on my way out.
Anybody else?
I'm just, you know, it's worth us reflecting that in Africa, the more educated you are as a young person, the less likely you are to find a job. It's an amazing statistic. You know, we are sleepwalking towards a world if we don't match the education system to the labor market of countries like Tunisia, where you had incredibly high education, the highest education rates on the continent, and no employment opportunities. And when you do that, you end up with these very, very combustible societies where young people are frustrated, they're connected, they're angry, and they have no jobs, and they're educated enough to know they deserve better. So we have to be very critical and serious about the relationship between what jobs there are, not now, but in 15 years, what skills are needed, and how we match all these component pieces together.
And I might say, this follow up on that point, one of the things that led to the downfall of Mr. Mubarak in Egypt is that the Egyptian higher education system was producing 400,000 graduates a year, and nowhere near 400,000 jobs for university graduates. However, in really poor places, poverty is still the biggest obstacle to education because it limits the tax base. And then governments have limited amounts of money to put into education, so the poorest people in the world are most likely to have to come up with school fees to help finance the education system. And it undermines the ability of the governments to educate teachers and to pay them properly to get the brightest young people to do that. One of the countries in the world, interestingly enough, that's made the most progress in education in the last 10 years is Finland. And one reason is, and they have more immigrants than ever before, people from 44 countries in the schools of this small country. You cannot get a job as a teacher there unless you graduated in the top 10% of your class at university. And it is the most prestigious job you can have. So I still believe it's very important to find ways to short circuit this poverty trap. I'll just give you one example in our neighborhood. The wealthiest country in Central America, just south of Mexico, by far is Costa Rica. It's the only country without an army. They have a police force and a Coast Guard to guard against drug trafficking. Otherwise, they spend nothing on a defense budget, and they put it into education, and their per capita income is more than twice as high as any other country in the region. So I think that another thing that a lot of you know much more about than I do, but you know, a 10-year-old can get on the internet and find out things in 30 seconds that I had to go to university to learn. That's the good news. The bad news is half the time you don't know if it's accurate or not, but anyway, you can find out. I think there needs to be a lot of thought from people who know far more than I do about whether we can short circuit a lot of the normal developmental processes that would give high quality education to people in not only in low income countries, but in poor areas of countries that aren't low income. South Africa's got the highest per capita income in sub-Saharan Africa, but there's still a lot of poor places. And we need to figure out what we can and cannot get out of technology made universally available and accelerate that.
I just want to add one comment on the issue of equalizing education, that often we forget that it depends on certain fundamentals. And I'm thinking of a phenomenon in South Africa where some very schools in very poor environments outperform schools that are well endowed. And I think it has something to do with certain fundamentals. You know, a well-run school, good teaching, not only from the curriculum point of view of the subjects and things, but the care that teachers demonstrate and show towards their kids. and the sense that the community around the school, which supports the school, is there to provide constantly the moral support. So it is important to visualize the school within a community setting that supports it in the light of the fundamentals that I've mentioned. We will be surprised to see if all that is multiplied across the schools, there's a good chance that it will produce citizens that are able to participate reasonably equally in the life of the country.
All right, we'll take our next question from Twitter. What is the most solvable problem of this generation and why? From Ariel Benedict, New York.
I'll take a shot. I have 2 kids. No one has to die of AIDS anymore. And no HIV positive mother has to give birth to an HIV positive baby. And South Africa has tripled the number of people on medicine in the last 3 years. Tripled. And increased 5-fold the number of people being tested. So you just build a barest of healthcare networks with essential training and empower nurses and community health workers to do everything they can. That's a problem you can stop worrying about. And the medicine is so inexpensive now, with adequate aid flows, we can solve that problem. You can go in and worry about something else.
And I think it's actually even more broad than that, because so many of the mechanisms that have been developed around combating HIV/AIDS and ameliorating the AIDS burden can be used to fight other communicable diseases. While public health systems are being built, those same mechanisms, those same community health workers, those same itinerant nurses can be treating diarrhea and ensuring that no child ever has to die of severe dehydration due to diarrhea. I love talking about diarrhea because I think it's true. Yeah, my dad's nodding. It's true. Because I just find it completely unconscionable that in the 21st century, we still have more than 700,000 children dying of diarrhea or dying of severe dehydration due to diarrhea every year, the majority of whom are from Africa. And we know how to treat it. We also know how to prevent it. I'd like to think in this generation we can prevent it by having clean water systems and sanitation systems, but at least we can prevent it. Similarly, we can prevent upper respiratory infections through the pneumococcal vaccine and other vaccines that can leverage the supply networks that have been built largely through an effort to fight AIDS. I think often the solution to one problem really does hold the kernel to solution to another problem, and we need to be kind of more cognizant in how we think about the ways in which not only the problems are connected, but the ways in which the solutions are connected too. Stride.
Thank you. I've just had the privilege to travel to places like Rwanda with President Clinton, and I would say from what I saw, no child need go to bed hungry. You know, we can end hunger and malnutrition. That is soluble. We have the resources, we have the land, we have the technology, we have the seeds. We just need to help smallholder farmers, many of whom are women. 80% of the food we consume on this continent is grown by women, smallholder farmers. If we can help them, the mothers, no child need go to bed hungry. That is within our reach.
If smallholder female farmers had access to the same quality seed and fertilizer that their male counterparts had, we could end hunger on the continent of Africa without even improving the quality of seed or fertilizer. So hopefully gender equality is something we can get to as well. Our bank, yeah, my dad said.
The banker will fix that.
Thank you. I think truly the underlying really critical problem to all these social problems has to do with poverty. And I think the world during this century can seek to reduce people living in abject poverty. The world has enough resources to go around, but we have to create business models and systems and structures that are able to provide the basic needs for all. And then essentially, things like hunger, things like disease can better be managed because people are sometimes driven to those situations by extreme need, which is driven by poverty.
I'm going to add to that. We need to contribute to building peace in the DRC. If you knew, the DRC can feed the entire African continent. That's the potential that it has. But because of the civil war in the DRC, in the Eastern DRC, and the mismanagement of funds and everything that is going wrong, there is no way the DRC can reach that potential. So I feel and believe that when we have peace in DRC, maybe Africa then will be able to end hunger.
Yes, you've been very patient in the blue sweater. Oh, sorry. Sorry. He's so tall, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
What-
my
why
turn
don't-
now. Okay.
Why don't you both ask your questions?
Two questions that I want to pose to the panelists. The first one is, how can we harness the cloud and influence of the newborns? That is the youth in positively contributing to transformation and empowerment. Then the second one is very specific, and I would wish to direct that to Professor Njabulo Ndebele. And basically, it's about the whole question of the medium of instruction from foundational phase of education to even higher education. I mean, there is a very complex debate raging on about the whole question of English, but also the thrill and the nostalgia towards using any of the vernaculars as a medium of instruction. And the real question is, shouldn't we come to a stage where we accept that English as a language should and is in fact, in reality, the only viable language that can be used to teach children at the foundational phase, even until university stage. Because once you open up institutions by using English, you are saying really an institution like University of KwaZulu-Natal, where they are mooting the question of Zulu, which to a certain extent is exclusive, but when you say English, you are simply saying a university is what it should be. It is an international institution. It might be based in KZN, but it's a world institution. It's a universal institution that anyone in the world, if he so desired, can use. Haven't we reached that stage? I know it's a very complex debate. It has been going on for years and years. Ngugi wa Thiong'o wrote about it. Chinua Achebe, many, and it will still go on even after our passing away. But isn't the reality, and small black children are starting to adopt English as their first language, and vernacular as something that is very strange to them. Is the reality not the fact that English is a universal language that does not necessarily belong to the English-speaking world only, but it's a language that the English have bequeathed to the entire world, and they can use it as a resource that they can empower their own nations? Thank you.
Why don't you answer the second?
Let's start with the second question. I think what you are describing is the convergence of history and incremental practicality, over time, on the one hand, and on the other, the desires of self-identity on the other. The indigenous language speaks to the second issue of wanting to have a place in the world through your language. and the world view that is captured and expressed through that language, which can never be the same in another language. So when you speak your language, you feel that you are at the center of the world. It's an identity question. What you have said that it's a long debate, and it will be a long one. It simply means that you have to be very careful about taking away one language which we have been exposed to through history, English, as a medium of instruction, education, business, law, and so on. It is impossible or extremely difficult to replace it quickly. Our Constitution does have a mechanism for ensuring that as we live with the dominance of English, we also take steps to improve on our indigenous languages. There's a constitutional provision for that. And I think we need to live with the management of the two.
I will take the first question, which is easy for me as a businessman. The potential of our youth. You know, Africa is the youngest continent. Over the next 25 to 30 years, the planet will add another 2 billion people, of whom half will be young Africans. Skills of those young people, how we skill them up, other than education, we have to provide them the skills in order to realize that potential. And that is the race that we have as Africa. It represents our greatest opportunity. But we have to square up to the need for skills development of our young people.
If I jump in, I think for Africa to unlock that demographic dividend, we must really focus on enhancing not just the education of our youth, but everything else that would make their capability relevant during our times. What is it that Africa requires most, such that it's not just the energy of the youth, it's not just the enthusiasm of the youth, but it's the whole capacity as required by the continent. Then we must avail them the opportunities, whether it's employment, whether it's entrepreneurship, but the opportunities we avail our youth must give them dignity and esteem. It's not really going by the book of what was relevant in the past, saying continues to be relevant. We must move with the changing time. What is it that will convey to them the esteem and pride so that they do what they are empowered to do with their passion and enthusiasm, and hopefully then enhance that dividend to transform the continent?
I think...
sorry.
No, ladies first.
Thank you. I was just going to add that the skills that were being talked about were really the skills for citizenship. I think that's what's been lacking. And I think there are two things that have struck me working with young people is that there's a lack of analytical skills. There is more data in the world than there has ever been. It's so available to you. There's budget data. Now it's the law that all extractive companies have to publish their payments to governments in Africa. That's going to be a goldmine of data on what our assets are, our resources. And I'm not sure that we're giving young people the skills to know what to do with that data in order to hold their leaders to account. That would be the first thing. And the second one is organizational skills. And, in this country, you have a wonderful example. The first leader of COSATU, Jay Naidu, was leading this organization at 28. Millions of members, subscription-paying members in the 80s. And those organizational skills to go out and build a movement of 1 million people in a representative, inclusive, subscription-paying way is critical, because we have to realize that with this youth bulge that we have, this potential huge demographic dividend, you will be able to win an election in the next 10 years in Africa without a single person over 30 voting for you. That's the power you have. That's the power you and your friends and your peers have. If you're organized, you're analytical, you can go out there, you can take the whole country because there's so many. So, those are the kinds of citizenship skills and orientations that we need. I mean, we as young people, it's in our hands now for the first time, and we need to take ownership of that.
I think one of the things that we rarely ever say that's really important about engaging young people is small world small word, fun. We don't make it fun. And if you just watch nature programs, you'll see that, when the lions are learning how to hunt, it's fun at first, and then it becomes a matter of life and death down the line. And I think I'm reminded of this game that a popular DJ plays every year around the State of the Nation. It's a drinking game. And he's a popular Twitterati. So what he has is this drinking game on Twitter where people have to identify how many times the president says a particular word or does a particular action within the State of the Nation. And you find thousands of people are now tuned in to the State of the Nation because they want to see when this phrase comes up or doesn't come up. So he's making it fun. And it's not about watching the State of the Nation, it's about the fun. But because of the fun, you end up watching the State of the Nation. And I think that there's a great opportunity to make the important things in our society fun. I think that's just a little bit of the philosophy that we've learned in our years with Cheese Kids as well.
Yes, my apologies to the man in the blue sweater.
No problem, Chelsea.
Sorry, so you know my name. Will you tell me your name?
Yeah, my name is Tulani Matondo from the Kliptown Youth Program. By the way, I'm also an alumni of the CDA program here in South Africa. My question goes to the whole panel because coming from the squatter camp of Kliptown, I'm one of the people who are very passionate about this country. And I want to know that what are we doing to ensure that our boys and young men are not left out of the system? Because in most of the places where I go around, I always hear about talking women empowerment and women development, which is very important because I was raised by a single parent, which was my mom. But my fear is that maybe in 10 years' time, we may have to create a department for men empowerment in South Africa because the boys will be left behind. And then the second question is that how do we also ensure that whatever programs that we start in communities around Africa or the world, people from the ground are integrated from the planning stages so that they could be able to take the ownership of the program? Because some of the things that I've seen coming from the township is that we are always being imposed with certain programs that people think will work in our communities, only to find that we've got something different towards that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I take a
please.
stab at this? Hi, Tulani. I grapple with this thing myself a lot of times, the issue of the boys and men. And I start to wonder if we aren't being, when you hear white people going on about how young white people can't get jobs in South Africa because of black empowerment. And then, because of this black empowerment, the most, appropriate person for the job might have been the highly skilled white guy, or white girl, but they're not going to get this job. A black person's going to get this job. And I listen to them, and they're frustrated by this, and I think, what are you talking about? There's hundreds of years of privilege, right, that we still have to work through. And I sometimes feel that maybe this discussion that we're having as men about, hey, men are getting left behind, is analogous to that. Because the opportunities that women have today, sure, are great, but it's nowhere near the opportunities that we have as men. We still have more opportunities. And you know what? Beyond the opportunities, we still have more clout. I can walk into a room with a woman can say whatever she wants. I'll do the full stop at the end. And that's still how things are. So I think the issue is not so much about how do we get the boys to contest, but how do we get a society of parity? How do we build a society of parity? It's I suppose, a typical South African problem. I think on the other issue, Tulani is modest because he's built a youth center that supports hundreds of kids in Kliptown after school, and they have tutoring classes and so on. But you built that, and right next door to you is Bob's place, and that was built, and those places were both built by people from Kliptown. And every time we go to Kliptown, those are places that are on the map, that are highlights that you say, we must come there. And even when we come as Cheese Kids, we come to your places. So when you ask the question, how do communities get involved, you're doing it. And I think maybe the issue is government has to just become more open source, where instead of trying to say, we'll do that, we'll do that, we'll do that, it just says, who's doing it? And go and help those people that are doing it. I think that's the way to do it.
Do you mind if I ask you, if I ask follow up on your observation on the men and women issue? Isn't the question addressing the issue of unintended consequences, where rightly we're addressing the issue of gender parity, but it triggers unintended consequences on the impact that it has on the men that then live on with it and compound the social problem?
I think beyond this particular issue is a greater issue of institutionalization. When young people come of age, there are very few institutions that take us in and show us how to become citizens, how to become young men, how to become responsible young ladies. That system doesn't exist. And I think if that was a system that we focused on building, that says, you know, this is the blueprint of what a successful South African person does, and we taught that from a very young age, I don't think you would have this issue of people, one gender falling behind and one gender coming out, even where you intervene even where you intervene in the way that we're talking about. So I think the bigger issue here is, how do we institutionalize the important values for society? How do we ensure that kids come out, they're not just going to school, but after school they have clubs that teach them those things, they have sporting activities, weekends, they have additional educational opportunities, reading and so on and so forth. And I think if you do that and you focus it, even when you're doing boy, if you have parity, one boy and one girl, I don't think you'll have the unintended consequence you're speaking about.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the dialogue opportunity, but mostly to thank the opportunity that I have to recognize Bill Clinton, Mr. Bill Clinton, who used to be a president during my time as a student in the USA. And today I stand here in the same platform where I can pose a question or two to you. I know you are a signatory to the Decade of Action for Road Safety. Decade of Action for Road Safety 2011-2020, the UN. Chelsea is reminding you. Yeah. Yes. I stand here requesting, Mr. Clinton, that the Clinton Foundation be active in support of the scourge that we face in South Africa, because we lose 14,000 people annually on the roads as a country. We lose about 1,200 a month of people that die due to car accidents. And you being the signatory and the supporter, together with the New York mayor, coming from the US, of the UN Decade of Action for Road Safety, I plead that as we live here, we engage in the way forward as to how we can curb the death toll in South Africa.
Thank you. When we had the Clinton Global Initiative in Asia, the Chinese actress Michelle Yeoh was the UN ambassador on the road safety issue. It's the global ambassador for this. And asked us to get involved, and we did try to support it through our organization there. And I can't say more now because I don't know what else has happened, but I promise you I'll look into it since you've raised it.
Thank you. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Jenner. I'm in my final year of high school at King Edward VII School. My question is, as a young South African committed to my country and standing here in front of all you inspiring people, what practical advice do you have for people like me who want to make a change today for a better tomorrow?
Well, I think the starting point to answering that question is what inspires you or what pisses you off, makes you angry. What do you think is unjust? And then what do you think you could do about any of those to stop something bad from happening or to help create something good? And then figure out whether you think you're best suited to do it kind of through the private sector or through the nonprofit sector or through the government sector. And I think that's a roadmap, and I think it's also okay if you change your mind along the way. I'm sure that all of us on the stage at different points in time have cared most passionately about different things, and certainly, you know, my father, for much of his life was in government, and now thinks his skills and also his time is best spent in a nonprofit way, whereas as my father often says about my mother, she was an NGO of one for many years, and then decided that she could make more of an impact on the issues that she cared the most about and kind of the things that made her most angry by being in government. So I think it's fun to think there's a lifetime ahead of you of answering that question.
I would like you to think about this. How fortunate you are to be able to ask that question. That will help you to answer it. Most people who have ever lived in all of human history never even thought about that question because they had to do whatever was at hand to feed themselves and their families and their children. If you think about all these questions you've been asking us tonight, about the challenges facing South Africa or the rest of the continent, the problems and everything, in the larger context of human history, it's a good thing. Because for most of history, people never thought about their common opportunity or obligation to solve common problems. So I think this, you have a choice about how you live your life. You should attempt to do something you love. Most people like doing what they're best at. You should have an honest assessment of what you're good at and then what you care about. And there ought to be some piece of your life where you're trying to answer all these things we've been talking about. I just want to make this brief observation because otherwise we'd be here till tomorrow morning if we got into the discussion. But you were talking about that before you, the man who asked a question there said, should there be some sort of affirmative program to empower men, like there is for girls and women? Then there was the question about, you know, the other kinds of tensions in countries. There is a global shortage of jobs for people who are young at every educational level. That's the point you were making, Khalil. So I think you ought to devote some of your time and thought to figuring out how to create gainful employment for people, whatever their educational level is, whatever their gender is, wherever they live. But just realize that no one can answer that question for you, how you will live your life. The fact that you can ask and answer the question is a gift. So you should never worry about the fact that you don't know all the answers. You may change your answer 4 or 5 times in your lifetime. That's a good thing.
Any other? Yes.
I have a comment and a question. My comment is anyone who takes pains to study the socio-economic issues of Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia will agree that for as long as we are in the monetary system, people will never, or rather will never bridge the gap between the wealthy and the poor. I think it was Henry Ford who said, if people really understood the money system, there would be a revolution tomorrow. The World Bank and the IMF borrow countries in the third world money and impose conditionalities. Those conditionalities, conditionalities which they term structural adjustment policies, allow multinational corporations such as Monsanto, Shell, BP, Standard Oil, DuPont, to come into third world countries and exploit them. So we may fund as many foundations as we like, but we'll never really make a significant contribution. My question to the Clinton Foundation, how is the Clinton Foundation any different from the Rockefeller Foundations, from the Rockefeller Foundation, which those of us who take pains to study these things know that it funded Jürgen Fischer in Germany at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute to push the pseudoscience of eugenics, which led to the massacring of the Jews and also suppressed black people. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I've never funded any eugenics. I'll tell you, I don't want to diss the Rockefeller Foundation. I can only tell you what we do. I don't go into any country unless the government welcomes us and asks us. I don't implement any program that the local government has not adopted as its own in advance. None of our people do any jobs of any kind that they have not been asked to do, including training people. And our whole goal is to work ourselves out of a job by increasing the capacity of people at the national and local level to do whatever it is we help to do, whether it is delivering quality health care or making smallholder farmers self-sufficient. And when we were in Rwanda, the Minister of Finance came up to me and said, you should get some totally neutral person to write the story of what your foundation has done in our country. This is the way it should be done. You have never told us what to do. If we ask your opinion, you give it to us. You never do anything except things we have already approved in advance, and you're trying to work yourself out of a job. And anytime somebody wants me to leave, we go. So I don't know if that's different or not. I don't know about the eugenics thing. I'm just telling you. And by the way, I agree with a lot of what you said. I do not believe that you can let, in a developing country, all economic policy be dominated by finance. There have to be investments in real things like infrastructure and education and the creation of jobs. And if all you do is worry about the rules of government budgets, you will never get ahead. On the other hand, you cannot ignore that, because if you ignore altogether running a good, clean, honest, open, transparent government, then nobody else will put their money in your country. And you can't make people move their money to your country, and you can't make people keep their money in your country. So I agree that we have often let the financial tail wag the economic dog for the last 25 or 30 years. But you cannot ignore basic rules of openness and transparency and arithmetic. So the question is striking the right balance. We need to move back toward building the real economy, but we also need to recognize that when someone like Strive is successful, he can invest in places where he thinks there will be honesty, transparency, and a reasonable rate of return. This man is a banker in Kenya who has done as much to help poor people in his country as anyone I know. So that's what I think. I think I agree with some of your criticism, but you cannot ignore the basic rules.
I think if I jump into the question, I've been privileged to have been a member of the Clinton Global Initiative for the last 8 years. And I guess what we derive particularly, the difference particularly, is in the inspiration of the private sector to do what they can do in their constituency. We look, it's not about money, it's more about inspiring those who can be able to make a difference, in their countries. And the ability to mobilize the private sector, to drive these within the communities, then ensures and guarantees that the best interest of the communities, which supports that private sector, are taken into account. And I see that as one of the biggest difference between the Clinton Global Initiative and other foundations, fundamentally.
Yes. I cannot leave your question on the Rockefeller Foundation unanswered. I've been a trustee of the Rockefeller Foundation for nearly 11 years now. And let me say this, you know, you can choose in life to see good, and you can choose in life to see evil. Let me show you some good. The Rockefeller Foundation has been around for about 100 years. It just celebrated its 100th centenary. At its foundation, it gave more money than the US government. The Rockefeller Foundation, a scientist at the Rockefeller Foundation called Norman Borlaug, was given a Nobel Peace Prize for his work in ending hunger in Asia. Hundreds of millions of people. The foundation on which, even today, we're trying to solve hunger in Africa. If you go across Africa, as I have done, not with Americans, but as a trustee of the Rockefeller Foundation, going to villages and schools, universities, they love the Rockefeller Foundation. The most profound institution I have ever come across is something called the American Philanthropic Foundation. It's unique, and they do extraordinary work. And I want to take this opportunity, while President Clinton is here, to thank you on behalf of the African people for the work done by the Kellogg's, the Fords, across this continent, helping children, helping mothers. Choose good.
Adil?
I think it was either asked the question. Sorry, I wanted to address you. I just wanted to speak to the first part of your point. I think it's true that the global governance architecture is unjust. And people don't say it often enough, okay? We have the European Union gives us aid for agriculture, and then we can't compete in the market in Europe because of the common agricultural policy. That's just inefficient. That's market inefficiency. The UN Security Council is run by the people who won the Second World War. This is not legitimate. I would say that trying to deal with those governance issues in the way I talked about earlier, by being organized, by being analytical, my view, I think we're stuck with the monetary system, so let's try and make it work for us. Let's try and have an African running the World Bank, right? Let's try and, that would be my suggestion. I would say that energy and passion that you have in dealing with injustice could be amazingly applied to fixing the system as it is, because I think we've gone too far down the path to change it. But you shouldn't, your point needs to be spoken to. We don't say enough that the rules are unfair, and they're unfair against developing countries, and they need to be reformed in the interest of everyone. I think that's true.
Let me just say one more thing about this. You should also not give up on changing these things. In theory, it's a very good thing to have a World Bank. And in practice, it lost its way. But let me remind you that the previous president of the World Bank, right before he left office, said that they had made a 30-year mistake when they stopped helping smallholder farmers in Africa, Latin America, and East Asia. And it was time to stop trying to drive them off the land, stop trying to over-mechanize agriculture, and give them a chance to feed the world. Then the current president of the World Bank, Christine Lagarde, said it was a mistake to overdo the harsh medicine of finance in the middle of this crash. So I don't think you should just give up on the institutions. I agree with what you said. They ought to be more broadly represented, but they can do a lot of good. And what Strive said about, in my experience since I became an NGO instead of a politician, the Rockefeller Foundation has been as innovative and effective as anybody I've dealt with. They financed the most successful reforestation of any major rainforest in the world in South America. And I could give you 10 other examples. So I think, if you don't agree with what somebody's doing, take them on and try to get the policy changed.
Now, the person who probably has the most tomorrows ahead of her to ask a question yet.
My name's Kimberly Malope. I'm an 11 years old motivational speaker. I'm the founder of The Hand That Gives, the face and ambassador of Sandisi Ubuntu Foundation. The Hand That Gives was born in Washington, D.C. Mr. Clinton, I've taken it upon myself to travel from one province to another, educating young girls about the use of sanitary pads, hygiene, HIV and AIDS, and the importance of education. So I wanted to know, Mr. Clinton, how can you help me to make my dreams come true and help a better South Africa?
Well, first of all, I was thinking maybe I should get you to help me do what I'm trying to do. I hope that by giving you this forum tonight, it helped you some. But if we should talk about what's being done where you live, what our foundation is doing in South Africa, and whether we could be more active where you live. But I think you're well on your way to having a huge impact on what happens. You spoke very well tonight, very knowledgeably, very credibly, and we will be in touch with you to see how we can help. I would like to help you. And you mentioned housing and supporting people in housing. I do recommend that before you leave tonight, you make contact with Zaitu and the other people here from Ubuntu to see if there's something they can do to be supportive of you as well. Thank you. She was great, huh? We'll follow up.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Duma Sisulu from Cheese Kids. My question is for Strive. I just want to ask you about inclusive business models and how do you feel you can make a difference for the poor with sustainable development?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question a little bit more loudly? I think we couldn't hear you.
Okay, my question is for Strive. It's about inclusive business models. How do you feel you can make a difference with inclusive business models for the poor?
I hope I understand your question correctly, but let me tackle it the way I've understood it. You know, as you build your business in today's environment, you have to be as inclusive and as holistic as possible. You have got to think about the environment. You've got to think about the communities in which you've got to work. You've got to be constantly thinking about how you can empower others. And it's not about waiting until you are very large, but you have to do it from the beginning. Think through your business model and about how, if it is harmful to your environment, if it is harmful to the community, then you should not pursue it. Thank you.
We had a question from Twitter that showed up earlier and that thankfully has reappeared, actually from live stream from Sunny. We have identified the weakness of Africa. What are its strengths?
I think Africa has many strengths. And the first one is its people. Africa is endowed with nearly 1 billion people. a youthful population that could really be used to enhance the opportunities that Africa has. Africa has no challenge of legacy systems. It's a continent that can leapfrog on technology, science, innovation, and creativity to catch up with the rest of the world. And lastly, Africa is endowed with natural resources. The question is, when you combine natural resources, you combine technology, and combine people, then Africa has what it takes to transform itself in just one generation.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think all of us should remember, but especially people who don't work here, Africa is a continent, not a country. And there's too much generalization about Africa, even from country to country where we work, where we're trying to save smallholder farmers. The same policies don't exactly work everywhere. But don't forget, 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world in the previous decade were in Africa. This decade, probably it will be 7. Certainly 9 of the 15 fastest growing economies are in Africa, which was in your article. This place is better than the uninformed know. And I think that we need the governance system and a system of transparency and integrity in the public sector in some places to catch up with what the private sector is already doing and what hardworking people in rural areas all over Africa are doing. But the people and the resources are your greatest strength. And their hunger. You know, there's a surprisingly small amount of cynicism in Africa, given the level of disappointment and loss, and in some places violence and division that people have gone through. It's thrilling to me, because I think cynicism is a cop-out. And the people here, the idea that, you know, you're still open to the future is an asset you should not squander.
I think there are also some things worth celebrating, which in the matter of a trend across the continent. I think one of them is that we have had a relative period of stability and a lack of conflict. I know that the DRC is still, there's a problem there, but across the continent, we haven't had for quite a while all these debilitating wars. And so that stability is important and something to build on. The second one is that I think elected government has become an important, almost a given. Okay, the election will be rigged here and there, but at least you had it, you know. So it really goes to how do you make sure that it doesn't get rigged in future, but at least you had it and you have that experience. I think I agree that the market economies across the continent are consolidating and they're growing fast on an indigenous base. And lastly, to reiterate the youth of the continent, and a priceless treasure.
I think the thing that excites me most about the continent and where we are is the opportunity. And, you know, on two sides, the opportunity for advancement, as has been mentioned, but also the opportunity to squander has actually begun to decrease, because African, especially young people, are really less and less tolerant of the status quo. So I think also to speak to that issue about the global structure and the rules, the opportunity to change those rules, you know, are increasingly present. To be able to rewrite the rules for how Africa interacts within itself and with the rest of the world is incredible. I don't think we've had this amount of opportunity in our known time.
I just want to say, you remember what Zaytu told you when she opened up? You want to know what Africa's strength is? An 11-year-old orphan left to care for 2 of her younger siblings winds up graduating from Mandela University and sitting on the stage tonight because of Ubuntu. You know, don't minimize, in the face of all the problems, don't minimize what has been created in the last 20 years or so in Africa. It's a different continent than it was when Mr. Mandela made us walk to freedom.
Well, I think, unfortunately, we're out of time, but hopefully this is the first of many dialogues that those of us in this room and in cyberspace will share into the future. I certainly, then this will have been an effective intervention. I was certainly struck listening to so many of the questions and the conversation about how similar the questions that we grapple with in the United States are. So whether it's the fact that women still earn 77 cents to the dollar that men do in the United States, or that more than 2/3 of teachers in our schools are uncomfortable with technology, despite the fact that even in our country, the 1.5 million jobs that we expect to be created in the next decade, more than 1 million will come in technology. So we similarly have a disconnect between our education system and what the economy expects of it. So please, if you figure out the answers, share them with us.
For a fee.
For a fee, even, absolutely. It can be a business transaction. Please strive.
Mr. President, we really appreciate it when you come. Keep coming.
Dad?
It was a great honor to co-sponsor this with the Mandela Center of Memory and the Foundation, and thank you. As the chairman of the board, thank you, Dr. Ndebele, for doing that. Because we served together, President Mandela and I became good friends. And I would just like to say 2 things that I learned watching him that I think are very important about embracing tomorrow. Whenever we had business to do because of the time change, I always tried to accommodate his schedule on the phone. So lots of times we would talk at night. Not one time did he ever call me that he did not ask about my daughter. And once he made me go get her so he could make sure she was doing her homework. Now, why am I telling you this? Because the most moving thing I said tonight was when I talked about Zaytu, and I saw it in a lot of your faces. There are stories behind all these issues. And one of the great legacies of Mandela is that in spite of the fact that he was denied the right to see his own children grow up, and all of these other things that he lost, he never forgot that politics and economics were about personal stories. And if you were sufficiently dedicated to giving people the chance to live their dreams and chart their course, you could figure out something to do that made sense. The second thing that I think is important, and it was legitimate a lot of these questions that were asked tonight were stimulating to me. But the second thing I learned from Mandela was that no one should allow the future to be dictated by the past. That embracing the future was not just about being a visionary, it was about a way of life. And that it is a choice not to allow the future to be dictated by the past. If you look around Africa, wherever people are trying to settle old scores and obsessed with gaining an advantage over someone who once had an advantage over them, there's a lot of trouble. Everywhere people who are thinking about working together to make something good happen, something good is happening. And that's something I learned from him. Freedom requires letting go and reaching out. There's nothing after all the problems you've got you can solve if you just make up your mind you're going to do it together. That's what I learned from Nelson Mandela.
Thank you.
Obani benga chinja mabobensi Onansi pieza Obani benga chinja mabobensi Onansi pieza Obani benga chinja mabobensi Onansi pieza Obani benga Nancy Piazza, Obani Benga Tinja Mabubesi, MP, Nancy Piazza, Obani Benga Tinja Mabubesi, MP, Nancy Piazza, Obani Benga Tinja Mabubesi. Yes,